Hey, it's Seth from the company Acrobuffos, and I'm here on the invitation of Casa from Snap Productions for the Online Performance Arts in Korea conference. Normally my wife Christina would be joining me in answering these questions, but she was pulled away due to a family emergency. So she left me a lot of notes in hopes to answer these questions. Anyway, I have her spirit animal here, a nice little egg, big eyes, sharp teeth, and lots of legs, just like my wife Christina. I want to thank Casa for asking the questions that I'm going to answer. He watched our documentary, and these are questions that he thought of, and they're really geared to be listened to by young creators and other people performing in the field to know how Christina and I, who were maybe 15 years into our career, created the show Airplay and what the challenges were that we encountered in creating the show. We've shuffled his questions around just a little bit to answer them almost in the way that Airplay was created, because there was no linear structure or linear line. We are in our New York City apartment. If you hear some weird sounds, we do have steam heating. It's winter, and out of these radiators, steam makes a lot of noise. I'll try to pause the video and then pick up once the steam stops. And the simplest answer we have in retrospect is that it allows us to tour the world. We can work for any age, any culture, almost any audience, from ages 5 to 95. And it lets us travel and see the world, which means as an artist, we get more bookings, and so we earn more money. That's the kind of capitalist US American perspective. Both of us got into making nonverbal shows before we knew this was possible, and we were drawn to nonverbal shows partially because I think Christina came from a background of doing ballet. She was a professional ballet dancer early in her life, and I was in the background of doing circus clowning and juggling. I think what really drew us to making nonverbal work is that from our perspective, it becomes more poetic. When you talk at an audience, everyone's already used to hearing you speak. But the minute you take the words out and you ask the audience to watch what you're doing on stage, they have to access a different part of their brain. And so they have to participate in some way making the story with you. We're interested primarily in live theater, the things that can happen only inside a theater with an audience there, or only outdoors in an arts festival where there are audience around us. There's something unique that happens when the audience is there and we're there and we have to somehow meet together. And we want to do things in person that you can't do on screen. Many plays, and this is not to say that I dislike plays, but many plays can be filmed and put on a television or on Netflix or on HBO or on whatever brand of television you're watching in Korea. And we want to do things in theaters that could only exist there live. The other advantage to doing nonverbal theater is that we can introduce music. And because both Christina and my background in dance, circus, juggling, music plays a large part of it. And in Airplay particularly, we wanted to bring music from all over the world into the show to let the audience hear classical music, hear music that they reference, that they recognize. And we know as artists that if you use a piece of music that someone has an emotional attachment to, it gives it a particular kind of effect. If you use a piece of music that someone's never heard before, it lets them get in the story in a slightly different way. Specific to that though, we are very, very, very particular about the piece of music that we use. One of the other parts about Airplay being a non-verbal show is it's almost like a dream world. And a lot of different audiences actually can interact with Airplay that we might not have expected. By being non-verbal, by being largely visual, we are open to audiences that have different needs. Elderly populations, people who have dementia, young people who have autism, all can come to our shows and have access to it in a way that they might not have as a show that's a talking show. They have to really pay attention to the words. So it's been a good choice for us. And if I had to be honest, in retrospect, the best part about making nonverbal work is that it lets us go all over the world and eat foods from different cultures. And our favorite thing to do is go and eat food around the world. So it's kind of a win-win situation for us. Well, in our world, what we do is we take a bunch of objects that interest us and take them into a rehearsal space and start to mess around with them. Kind of like an inventor or an experimenter might do. Writers have the luxury and the privilege of going to a coffee shop and sitting and writing in a notebook and drinking coffee and typing and working out their ideas on a computer or on a yellow pad of paper or in their minds. We literally have to go into a room and start to say, hey, what does this chopstick do and what can it be? What does this egg do, or what can Christina do and what could it be? What could this rubber duck do and what could it be? And most of the objects that we work with don't work. With Airplay, we were lucky to collaborate with Daniel Wurtzel, and he already had some objects that were flying beautifully in the middle of the circle. But people always ask us all over the world, why didn't you use this thing or that thing or this thing or that thing? If you ask us, we've probably tried it. We've tried floating Chinese lanterns in there. We've tried putting soccer balls in there. We've tried 30 different kinds of umbrellas. We've tried so many things. And not every object is inherently theatrical. We ended up whittling down from hundreds of objects that we tried, the ones that worked best to express the emotion of the show we were trying to create. One of the other interesting parts about creating work with props is that we're always searching to create work we haven't seen before. It's very easy in our field to see someone do something successful and copy it. You'll see that a lot in the circus. A juggler does something and someone copies a juggler. A clown does something and someone does a version of that routine over and over and over again. But we always want to push and find a way to make work that we haven't seen before. And that takes time. It takes a lot of time. You can't just go into a studio and 3 days later come out with some kind of masterpiece. You really have to pursue the objects to the end to see everything you can do with them, and then be willing, 100% willing to say, that's not working well enough, we're done with that. We're done with that. And then maybe keep it on the side, keep it in your back pocket, keep it next to you, because 10 days down the road, you'll be like, oh, now I know what to do with that. That happened with us with the giant balloons in Airplay and the little glitter that flies up in the air and the small red balloons. We could never get that scene, what we call planets, to work. A year later, we come back to it and we're like, oh, now we know how to do it. So we kind of kept everything with us ready to go. The other thing that's interesting about objects, especially from a circus clowning perspective, is that know who's used it before. Know where your objects are coming from. The giant balloons that we climb inside of, we knew were a popular vaudeville variety act. We'd seen them used at outdoor festivals in Europe and at varieties and cabarets for the last 10 years. And that act has been around for a long time. And we said, okay, do we want to do this act? Is it important for our show to do this? And if we do it, we don't want to copy what other people are doing. How can we take this idea, which is funny, but actually make it our own and make it work specific to the show, Airplay? And so in the process, we did everything that every other giant balloon artist does. And if you've seen these acts, you put it on your head and you bounce it up and down. You slide into it, you get your legs stuck out of it. There are a lot of ways of doing it that are done over and over again. We said, how do we do it and how do we make it our own? Both through choreography, through character, and through the music choices we made. And I think for that act, the giant balloons act that we're bouncing around in, we definitely found a version that works for us. Our original intent actually for Airplay was to take our street theater show Water Bombs, which was a 30-minute show and very fun, and put it into a theater, figure out how to protect the theater from water, and add 30 minutes onto the show of a different kind of material, like a different kind of show. We'd have a first act and a second act, and we could sell that and go around the world. And that was the Daniel Wurtzel circle idea. The minute we started working with his fans and his fabrics, we knew that this had to be a show. But we wanted the show at that time to be a very hip, urban show, something kind of dark, a little bit evil, a little bit mean. But the materials we worked with were light. They had breath in them. They were playful. And so the materials in many ways helped us find the themes of Airplay, helped us illuminate which direction to work in. We come from the background of a circus, and we knew from working in circuses that you want a kind of a variety show. That variety shows were touring and were popular all over the world at the time we started Airplay, 2011, 2012. And we're like, we're gonna make a variety show. We'll make 8, 9, 10 different acts. We'll do a comedy act, a beautiful act, a spectacle act, a comedy act, and that will be the show. There were a lot of models of theater companies, clown companies, circus companies at that time that were working in this variety model. And as we worked with the idea that we wanted to have a secret circus, and what we know about the structure of theater is that in the circus, you want something fast, quick paced, a juggling act. You want something beautiful, high up in the air, a aerial act. And then you want the clowns to come in and kind of take the air out of the situation. You want to ground the audience in comedy. And we thought if we could create Airplay in that kind of structure, the structure of a kind of classic circus evening, we would have a show that had the right rhythms, the right emotions. And then we got to the end of the show, about 3 years of working on it, and the audiences that came to watch us before we were presenting, we would have what we call showcases, and people would come and watch what we're doing and give us feedback. They all wanted us to put in a story. So that's in some ways the way the themes of Airplay were created. One of the things we thought with Airplay was that inherently the sculptures would be beautiful and we could leave the stage. that we could let the planets fly around and we didn't have to be there, that we could let the umbrellas fly around and we didn't have to be there. We would be in rehearsals and be sitting watching and thinking how beautiful this stuff is, that we could just put some music on, go off stage, have a cup of tea, maybe a glass of water for a minute, let the audience just watch that. And what we found with test audience over and over is that they said they want more of us. The spectacle and the beauty was fine, but they want to see more of us on stage. I think they wanted more of our humanity. They wanted more of our comedy. In that case, we had to rewrite the show to put more of us into the show. We had to look at the scenes in which we thought we could leave the space and say, how do we integrate ourselves into here? And the scene of planets with the balloons in the air, the glitter, sitting on suitcases and putting focus there lets the audience feel like they're up on stage with us. In the scene with umbrellas, where we're fighting with the umbrellas, which we thought we could just let fly around, the audience can get in that fight with us and they can both see the beauty of the umbrellas flying, but also can feel the fight of the two characters. That said, with any kind of show that you own, that you create, it is never, never finished. And the crux scene, the scene that we think of as the most emotionally difficult scene, it's where the umbrellas are flying in the air, there's been a fight between the characters, something has gone wrong between us. That scene, it took over 100 shows to settle. And after every single show of airplay for the first 100 shows, we would sit with our team, our stage manager, our technical director, Christina and I, and when our director would come in, we'll talk about him in a minute, we would talk with him, but just the four of us for the most part on tour in different countries and say, what went well in that show and what could we make better? And we always came back to that crux scene and had to rewrite it little by little by little by little. And by the time we got 100 shows in, we felt like, okay, airplay has settled. And it wasn't just the crux scene that we had to rewrite. We wrote a joke here, we would add a joke here, we would add a joke there. And we're still doing that. We're over 250 shows into airplay, and we're still finding ways to make it a little bit funnier, to tell the story just a little bit better. We are self-creators, we like to do everything ourselves, but at some point, when you work in a theater, you need someone to come in as an outside eye. And people often think that a director is going to solve all their problems. I'm going to make this work and they're going to come in and tell me how to do it and it's going to be great. That is so far from the truth. In our experience, we want to be the writers and creators of the show, but we need someone to collaborate with us to look at the show from the outside and also give some of his opinions to us. We worked with a director we'd worked with on a circus. His name was West Hyler, and he was a great person to work with. He was optimistic. He was enthusiastic. If Christina and I were fighting about the ideas, he would come in and bring some humor and some levity. He would bring in ideas and then we would fight with him about his ideas. We became friends through the process of making the show, but we had a lot of good fights about the art. The best part for me about having a director in the creation of airplay was that we could all put ideas in the room and then we would fight to the death, or fight to the clown death, or just we would fight to find the best idea for the show. Oftentimes, Christina and I would come up with an idea with West in the room, with our director in the room, and the next day be like, no, we're not going to do that. But by coming up with that idea together, it helped us answer the question about where we should go next. Number one, if you bring a director into your show, if you bring a director into the room with you, be very clear about what their parameters are. Are they the director? Are they running the process? Or if you're the creator, are you running the process and they're going to largely be the outside eye, be the foil, be a different voice, being someone that reflects back on the show to you. Oftentimes by the end of the process of creating airplay, we would have Wes come in for an hour and say, hey Wes, this is the material we've created, what do you see? And he was great at sitting there and saying, I see two characters, I don't understand what's going on. Or it looks like you guys are chasing butterflies. Or it looks like, and we'd be like, yes, that's what we're going for, or no, it's not. And then he would go away and we would work for another day and he would come back for an hour and give us feedback. That was a very effective way of working. It's also important to think about bringing another technical person into a show that has experience that you don't. Christina and I had come from doing street theater and had come from doing circuses. We'd never worked in large theaters with a show of our own. West Hyler, who had worked on Broadway with several shows, knew how to speak the language of the theaters. And he came into our process at a very invaluable time, so we could go and work in a theater and he knew all the language and we could learn along with him. So if you're going to go work in a venue or an environment that you're uncomfortable with, or that you don't know much about, or that's new to you, Bring someone in that can help open those doors. I can help teach you about that. See, I'm trying to get all the notes that Christina gave, my ideas and her ideas, I'm trying to get them all in. But one other thing that it's kind of unusual for a company like Christina and I, rather than a regular theater company, is that we did pretty much everything. We built our own props, we organized and edited our own music, we spray painted things, we developed our carnet, it's a passport for our goods, I'll tell you about that later. We pay the bills, we write the checks. We are a very small team that puts on this show. And I think by doing so, by keeping our team this small, we've been able to have a very strong effect with our show. We did bring a light designer in. That's the other kind of secret sauce of Airplay. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. We wanted to strip our body of its kind of cultural gestures. We wanted to have the most simple gestures to create the most clear storyline. For our show Water Bombs, we need a very different kind of energy. We need like a strong sports, physical energy. For our show Madame and Monsieur, where we use half masks, we need very hyper-extended body movements and body gestures. For Airplay, we want it to be as clear and as uncluttered gesture as possible. And we had to kind of shift ourselves out of our common gestures. Every show you create is going to require a very specific language of movement and gesture. And it was only through trial and experimentation, feedback with our director, watching ourselves on video, in that we could say, okay, here are the movements of Airplay. One of the advantages of Christina coming from a dance background is that she knows that every single movement and gesture means something. And so every position of our body in every second of Airplay is chosen, is decided. I come from a Lecoq-based physical theater background, and the same kind of training we get there. What is your body doing in space and what is it communicating to the audience? Our body becomes the text. And the text of Airplay had to be a soft and poetic in some points, and also hard and aggressive in others. We also call Airplay a poem. It has to do with our acting style, it has to do with the emotions we create, and we think of it as a poem because it's open to interpretation. It's open-ended. You can read a poem and have a lot of different stories come out of it. And just when you see Airplay, you can have a lot of different stories that comes out of it, which is also we wanted our acting to be more open, to allow a variety of interpretation. When we were creating the show, once we knew we needed to have a through line, we knew that we were a guy and a girl, a man and a woman, and everyone's like, well, you should do a love story. Love stories are done all over the world. Love stories are the obvious answer, but also love stories are culturally specific. We knew we wanted to tour Airplay internationally, and we want to say, what was a story that's universal? And friendship, siblinghood, brother and sisters, growing up together, that kind of platonic craziness you have with someone you're so close with that one moment you're having the best time on a swing set, and the next moment you're in the mud fighting and punching each other, and then you're happy again and having ice cream. That was the kind of relationship we wanted to put in Airplay. And going back to acting style, we didn't want to play kids. We wanted to be kids being played by adults in a way that was open-ended so people could put their own stories into it again. And that's a very specific choice about gesture and character that we had to make. Christina thought about this a lot. I've thought about this a lot. And based on our experience, we can say is that schools are excellent. Theater schools, circus schools, dance schools, schools that help train your body and help you look critically at your work are excellent to help you along the way. In fact, physical theater schools that enable critical thinking, of being able to look at your work, reflect on your work, train you to be both an actor, a director, and a creator are essential in many ways to having a very good professional career. Even more important than that for us was to take what we learned in school and put it out on the street. Street theater was a very good form at the time we were doing it because you could put ideas out on the street, it didn't cost you much money, and if people liked them, they would stay, and if they didn't like them, they would walk away. And what that also serves to do is it serves to flatten your ego or flatten your emotions, and you say, okay, hey, the work is not good, but I think I can make it better. And you learn to separate yourself from your work. Street theater is the most ego-crushing, soul-destroying form of performing there ever is, because you can think you're brilliant and no one stays around to watch you. You get used to doing that, you start to say, oh, it's not about me, it's about the work we're creating. What's the work that's going to work in this environment? Now, what's interesting about street theater is that not every kind of show will work in a street theater environment, but you learn what works in those environments. Not every kind of show works in a large theater. Not every kind of show works in a circus tent. But street theater taught us very quickly how to come up with ideas, how to structure ideas, how to retain the interest of an audience, how to generate material quickly, and was incredible training for separating ourselves personally from the work we're creating and for keeping the audience's attention because you can see them. There's sunlight out and you can see when people get distracted. And we took the same ideas of street theater. Hey, they're watching, now they're checked out. Hey, they're watching, now they're checked out. What do we need to hook them? What do we need to reel them in? And in airplay, we said the same kind of things. We know they're in a theater, so they're going to be more focused. What tricks can we use in the theater to keep people focused? Is it the shift of a light? Is it the movement of a balloon? Is it the way that we look at each other? How can we keep them so they're always wondering what's going to happen next? How do you fight for every moment of your audience's attention? It's so easy in theater to say, oh, they paid for the ticket, they're going to sit in there and watch us. But there's terrible theater. I've spent endless amounts of money at festivals in Edinburgh around the world watching terrible theater because they just assumed that because they made it, I should watch it because I paid for it. In street theater, you pay at the end. In street theater, your audience is honest and it's generous. And in airplay, we took the same idea. We want people focused on us the entire time. And every time we saw them checking out, we would say, what can we do here to get them back in? Very important. Maybe the most important thing I can think of. When I started as a young circus performer, they taught me classic material. This classic juggling number, this classic clown number, this classic so-and-so. And it was a way to learn the techniques of working in the field that I was in so that I would have some success and I would feel, okay, I can do this. Very quickly though, the idea was to say, let's take this classic material and now let's start to create our own. There are definitely ways in which you want to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this thing that already exists in the world and become proficient at it so I can learn from it. I'm going to create a street theater show in the structure of a classic street theater show. I'm going to create a clown number in the structure of a classic clown number so I understand how comedy works. I understand how the art form works and I have some confidence. Once you have that kind of confidence, you want to bridge off, you want to branch off and say, okay, what can I, in my own imagination, in my own body, in my own perspective of the world, what can I bring that's unique to this art form? One of the other things that's also important is that once you've created a piece of work and you're performing it in front of an audience, you have to defend it. You have to believe in it. If you have doubt in it, the audience is going to have doubt in it. The one other thing that's important, if you have the time, the resources, is to see what's out in the world. Christina and I very early in our life got out to see work at different festivals, either because we were traveling with companies or we said, hey, we're going to go there and do some research. Let's go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and do some research to see what's out. Hopefully we meet someday in person. Hopefully Christina comes back from her family and doesn't look like an egg with big teeth and big eyes and lots of legs. I prefer her as a real person. Also, from my standpoint, she's the funnier one of the two of us. So I'm sorry she wasn't here to talk on the camera. Maybe we'll meet in person, and all the best to you. And someday, really, I hope we meet in Korea. We've been there 3 times. It's one of our favorite countries to tour to, and especially one of our favorite countries to eat in. I know you might think I might say that to everyone I talk to, but really, I have 3 Korean cookbooks, and my fridge is always stocked with kimchi. We love it so much. Hope to meet you in person.